Hi there, and welcome to another episode of Sylvia and Peter talking about mental health. Sylvia and I are both therapists. We both have a long career behind us, doing other things in industry than dealing with mental health and well-being. But it's something we've both been interested in for a long, long time. So we added it on top of what we are doing. So now we've both gone solo and work on the prevention of poor mental health and on the repair work when it has happened. We are recording a number of 10-minute breaks because it's important to take a break in your working day. So we aim to limit this conversation to 10 minutes. We have a coffee as we speak, as you will see cups going up and down from time to time. So by all means, have your tea, have your coffee, listen to this when you take a break. Today, we're talking about mental health language and the use and misuse of mental health language and terminology. I have certainly heard a lot of people say, "Oh, I'm so OCD." But when I work with OCD clients, there's no comparison. OCD is obsessive compulsive disorder. Sounds long and fancy, but it is something that takes over your life. So if you're house proud, if you like a clean desk and you don't think that you can work comfortably if there's clutter on your desk, that doesn't mean you've got OCD. That just means you like tidiness and maybe that you're house proud. So we have to be careful about what terms we throw about what we call things, because as one of my OCD clients has actually told me, she takes offense when somebody throws this OCD terminology around as some throwaway, like, "Oh, I've got a bit of headache today," or "I think I've got a cold." "Oh, I think I've got OCD." No, you know if you've got it, and you know actually if you don't. It is not. It doesn't make you smart. It doesn't make you clever to use that terminology, and you have to be mindful of those people for whom it is actually a big problem.
Definitely, because under DSM-5 and the ICD-11, they are a clinically diagnosed mental health disorder and or condition. And you get some say, "I'm really OCD today," can be quite offensive. I've worked with a young girl at the college where I am. She has a clinically diagnosed PTSD, and there are other students sometimes, "Oh, my PTSD is really kicking in today." She gets quite offended, quite upset at the fact that, do you really know what PTSD means? Do you really know what has happened for me to have this clinical diagnosis? It's taken her a long time to get a clinical diagnosis. And I think sometimes, talking about mental health, but let's remember what mental health is and what it isn't. We are here talking about poor mental health, if we are really sticklers for it. It's taken her a long time to get that diagnosis. And it's quite offensive for her. And I think what happens is when people are talking mental health or poor mental health, sometimes I think there is the negative side that things can start to lose their true meaning, and the words can sometimes become meaningless. I don't mean meaningless, I mean meaningless. For example, "I'm really depressed today." Are you really depressed in terms of clinically diagnosable condition? Or are you just feeling down, low, miserable, isolated, whatever? And there is that sort of tipping point between the clinical diagnosed poor mental health conditions and when we are just using that word. You talk about misuse. I don't know whether they're misusing or just not fully understanding what those words really mean.
I think you're right. I sometimes call it abuse of the terminology, but again, I think it comes down to not knowing, ignorance. Sometimes you hear things and then you get half an idea about what you're talking about. Depression is one of those that "Oh, I'm so depressed today." Well, no, depression doesn't happen overnight. It's not something that just kicks in like whatever else can just kick in. It is a gradual progression towards a condition that can then be diagnosed as depression. And your depressed mood will have to have lasted for at least 2 weeks before we even talk about depression. We have to differentiate our language and our understanding what's going on. Instead of going straight for depression, how about saying, "I have a bad day. I feel a little bit under the weather. I'm in a bad mood." And then figure out what that is, and usually it goes away after a day or two on its own accord, and then you have not had depression. You really haven't. You've had a bad day, like we all do.
We're all human.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I get a lot of people going straight into anxiety. I have anxiety. I'm so anxious. When there are other terms either side of anxiety. You could be apprehensive, you could be worried. If you're worried where your kids are today, does that mean you've gone into anxiety? I don't think so. You can also be anxious, you can be very anxious. You don't have to go straight into panic attack or anxiety attack. So we have to understand, the more varied our language is, the better able we are to express how we feel, instead of going bang into the popular terminology that so many people use incorrectly.
I think you make a great point there about anxiety. Depression, fully clinically diagnosed depression, is an illness. Anxiety is an emotion that we can all experience.
It's natural.
It's an emotion that we all have. We don't all get depressed, but we can all potentially get anxious. And yes, of course, there are certain diagnoses under the DSM-5 and the ICD-11 that there are, general anxiety disorders. Yes, we're not talking about those, but we're talking about anxiety, like you say. When is it excitement? When is it nerves? When is it apprehension? When is it panic? Isolating, is it anxiety or is it nervousness? It's very interesting that, where is that tipping point between them all? And so we can all get anxious, but it's when it starts to impact our life on a daily basis, that's when the clinicians will get involved to give you a diagnosis. But let's not forget, it's an emotion that we can all experience.
Anxiety is good and fear is normal.
Yeah.
People don't like it when I say that, but those are the two defense mechanisms we have automatically in our brain, and they stop us from doing stupid things. It gives us just that little pause to stop and think, actually, should I do this? Should I say that? Should I jump head first off this cliff, or could I actually go and break my neck if the water is too shallow? We have that mechanism to protect ourselves. When that mechanism works over time and does it too well, that is when you feel the huge pangs of anxiety and of fear. And just coming back to depression, because there's a lot of it going around, and a lot of people have depression. I don't treat depression as a term. I figure out what has led up to those depressed moods, and then we peel the layers of the onion and take the root causes away. Then the mood lifts. That's what happened to me when I was in a position of needing help with my long-term depression. We figured out why my thinking was the way it was. Where did all this come from? Was it actually realistic? And there are so many reasons why you can go and find yourself in a depression. So we shouldn't just think, it's a one size fits all and it's one treatment fits all, because we're all different, and nothing in mental health and mental ill health rather is the same. The label may be the same, but the underlying symptoms and circumstances and individual feelings are totally, as I said, individual.
And you say, it's like what sits behind that anxiety and that fear, their early warning system. What sits behind that depression? Is it a clinically diagnosable illness or condition, or is there something else that's going on that can be unpicked and discussed, put a different perspective on it, different rationale around it, and look at it differently, and then change creates change. But I think it's being very mindful, pardon the pun, of the language that we use when we're talking in everyday language. Because coming back to my experience and your experience, it can be like my experience at the college, can be quite offensive to someone who's sitting there quietly, who he's struggling with something's diagnosable, and someone else talks about it. I don't mean flippantly, because I don't think there's any malintent there. But they talk about it, because it's become the wording to use, but it's not appropriate.
Yeah.
I feel like we're getting into a bit of a hot water here, but I think that's the whole point of these conversations, is to raise people's awareness to what mental health is and what poor mental health is, and the different language around that. So sometimes people say, I'm suffering with anxiety. Well, we all have anxiety. Is it really anxiety in terms of a condition or an illness, or is it something we need to unpick and have a look at and see if you can manage it in a different way? What can you do differently?
And I think part of the reason I think part of the reason people use mental health or psychological language and terminology incorrectly is because the whole concept of mental health is so difficult to define. Poor mental health is difficult to define. We can say, well, it represents these and those symptoms, or you can't do this or that, you can't think, you can't plan, or you can't make decisions, when your cognitive abilities are impaired. But the whole thing called mental health is very difficult to define very accurately. So we have to use the terminology that is out there and then try and apply that in different situations. And I think a lot of the language within the mental health industry and area is very bombastic, very sharp, and not particularly helpful sometimes, and can actually scare people a lot. Do we have a disorder, or are we just feeling low? Is a disorder a label for life, or can it be fixed? That we have a lot of work to do to find language that is more
less scary,
expressive, less scary, better explaining what is actually going on. But it is difficult, as we all know, when we talk to people and people talk to us about their innermost feelings. It can be very difficult to define and to describe.
And I think sometimes, the medical profession, talking the jargon, the language that I have in that medical profession, someone steps into that, but that professional will still use that language rather than thinking, does this person truly understand when I say there is a depression? What that means is X, Y, and Z. When you have a generalized anxiety disorder, what that means is this, this, and this. To actually remember that the other person on the other side of the conversation might not always fully understand. And again, taking that time to explain what that means. So what that means is this.
I think we are all guilty of using our specialized language in our world. Sylvia, we were accused of using psychobabble, using all sorts of fancy words that only those who develop them actually know what they mean, but they look great in the book, but the ordinary person has no idea what you're talking about.
But I think both of us approach to the coaching and counselling that we both do, we both use very ordinary language. We explain what's going on, we explain the terminology, and that for me is what it's all about. When you've got someone on the other side, to enable them to understand what's going on, and using the beauty of the English language to do that, and sometimes dropping all that wonderful language and terminology and diagnoses, and using just language that everyone can relate to and resonate with.
I mean, I like what you say there, because I'm an old linguist. I am totally interested in language and how it works, because we use language to express our thoughts, and some would say the fact that we don't have any thoughts, but that's when we put our foot in the mouth. But language can be used to also shape our thoughts. If we keep talking about something in a negative way, in a positive way, we will eventually think about it in those terms. So in terms of language, in terms of thinking, what we're saying, we would really like your thoughts about our thoughts, what we've been talking about for the last 10 minutes or so. So if any of this has resonated with you, if you have any comments, if you feel passionately about something, you can find our contact details at the end of this video. You can also find us on LinkedIn. Go to our websites, do whatever you want, contact us, put your comments where you can put them. And we look forward to seeing and to responding, of course. So thank you very much for staying with us for this coffee break. And we shall see you in another episode of Sylvia and Peter talking about mental health. Take care and see you later. Bye now.
See you later. Bye-bye.